Look, lady, I don't have time to read you the whole menu to a blind person. Figure it out yourself or leave. The words sliced through Haven Grounds coffee shop like a blade, and Catherine Sterling's face went white. Her service dog pressed closer to her legs as she stood frozen at the counter, her white cane trembling in her grip. The 19-year-old barista, Kevin, rolled his eyes and turned away, leaving her standing there like a discarded thought. "I'm sorry," Catherine whispered, her voice barely audible. "I just wanted a simple coffee." "Then you should have gone to a drive-through," Kevin snapped back, loud enough for the entire shop to hear. "This isn't a charity." From behind the espresso machine, James Mitchell felt his blood turn to ice. 3 years of watching the world treat his blind daughter like an inconvenience had built a rage in him that he kept carefully buried. But watching this woman, this stranger, endure the same casual cruelty that Lily faced every day, something inside him snapped. Mr. Rodriguez looked up from his newspaper, his face twisted with disgust at Kevin's behavior. Mrs. Chun had stopped stirring her tea, her mouth hanging open in shock. Even the espresso machine seemed to hold its breath. Catherine's fingers found her dog's harness, the same gesture James had seen Lily make 1,000 times when the world became too much. She was preparing to leave, to retreat from this public humiliation with whatever dignity she could salvage. James couldn't let that happen. Not today. Not ever. 3 years ago, his world had collapsed in a single moment. Elena crossing 5th Street after her doctor's appointment, the neural drive shuttle sensors failing to detect her in the crosswalk, the impact that stole everything. The company's lawyers had called it an unfortunate algorithmic miscalculation. They'd offered money and silence. James had taken both, hating himself for it. The settlement money had bought Haven Grounds, this small coffee shop in Portland's Pearl District. It was supposed to be a fresh start, a way to provide for 10-year-old Lily while staying close to home. Instead, it had become a daily reminder of his failures. 3 months behind on rent, bills stacking higher than hope, and now watching his cheap hire humiliate a customer the same way the world humiliated his daughter. "Dad, what's happening?" Lily's voice carried from behind the counter, where she'd been arranging pastries with the precision of someone who'd memorized every detail of their small world. Born blind, she navigated life with a grace that shamed most sighted people. But James had seen her face after encounters like this one, had held her while she cried about being treated like she was broken. Through the rain-streaked window, the gleaming towers of neural drive systems pierced the Portland sky like accusations. The company that had killed his wife, that had reduced Elena to a settlement check and a gravestone, employed thousands of people who walked past his shop every day. They lived in a different world, one where mistakes were quarterly reports, not shattered families. Kevin was still sneering at Catherine, enjoying his moment of power over someone he saw as helpless. Seriously, there are other coffee shops. Maybe try one that specializes in your situation. The cruelty was breathtaking. James watched Catherine's shoulders sag, watched her turn toward the door, watched her prepare to flee from this public humiliation. Her service dog whined softly, sensing her distress. "Kevin." James's voice cut through the tension like a blade. "Go to the back. Now." "What? I'm just trying to move the line along." "There is no line. Go to the back before I fire you." Kevin's face flushed red, but he stomped toward the storage room, muttering curses under his breath. James would deal with him later. Right now, there was only Catherine, standing in the middle of his shop like a wounded bird, and the choice between letting cruelty win or fighting back. He stepped out from behind the counter, his heart pounding with 3 years of suppressed fury and fresh determination. The woman who stood before him, trembling with embarrassment, could have been anyone. Could have been Lily in 20 years. Could have been Elena, if she'd lived to face a world that measured worth by convenience. Catherine turned toward his approaching footsteps, hope flickering across her features like candlelight in a storm. Her service dog's tail gave a tentative wag, sensing the shift in energy. James had spent 3 years learning to describe the world for Lily, painting pictures with words so she could see through his eyes. He'd learned that blindness didn't make someone less human, just differently human. He'd learned that patience was a choice, kindness was a decision, and dignity was something you gave to others, not something they had to earn. He'd also learned that sometimes the most powerful thing you could do was simply see someone when the rest of the world chose to look away. The coffee shop held its breath. Mr. Rodriguez had set down his newspaper entirely, watching the scene unfold. Mrs. Chun clutched her teacup, her eyes bright with unshed tears. Even the rain seemed to quiet against the windows, as if the storm itself was waiting to see what happened next. James looked at Catherine, really looked at her. Expensive coat that spoke of boardrooms and power lunches, but hands that shook with vulnerability. Silver threading through dark hair. A face that carried the weight of someone used to being in control, but finding herself helpless. She was maybe 40, successful by any measure, but standing in his coffee shop like a lost child. He leaned closer to her, close enough that only she could hear, close enough that his words would wrap around her like armor against Kevin's cruelty. What he was about to whisper would change everything. For Catherine, for himself, for the small coffee shop that had become his refuge from a world that had taken everything he loved. Before we continue, let me know where you're watching from. Drop your city or country in the comments below. I love seeing how these stories of kindness reach people all around the world. The next words would light up her face like sunrise after the longest night. James leaned in close, his voice barely a whisper against the storm's fury outside. You're not invisible, not today. The words hit Catherine like a physical force. Her breath caught, her grip on the white cane loosened, and for the first time in months, her carefully constructed armor cracked. A smile spread across her face, radiant and genuine, transforming her from a woman braced for cruelty into someone remembering what kindness felt like. "Thank you," she whispered back, her voice thick with emotion she hadn't expected to feel. James straightened, speaking louder now so the whole shop could hear. "I'm James and I own this place. Let me tell you about our coffee." He gestured toward the menu board, then caught himself. "Actually, let me show you something better." He guided her gently to the counter where a small plaque sat beside the register. "My daughter helped me install this," he said, placing Catherine's fingers on the raised braille dots. "She insisted every customer should be able to read our menu independently." Catherine's fingers traced the braille with practiced ease, her smile growing wider. She looked up in James's direction. "Your daughter has excellent taste. She's 10, and she'd argue with you about that," James said, warmth creeping into his voice for the first time in months. "Lily thinks our hot chocolate is superior to any coffee we serve." From behind the counter, Lily's voice piped up. "Because it is, Dad. Coffee tastes like burnt water." Catherine laughed, a sound like silver bells that made the entire coffee shop feel lighter. "I think I like your daughter already." "Most people do," James said. Then his voice hardened slightly. "The ones worth knowing, anyway." Kevin's muttering from the back room grew louder, but James ignored him. He focused on Catherine, on the way her shoulders had relaxed, on how her service dog had settled calmly at her feet instead of pressing protectively against her legs. "What would you recommend?" Catherine asked, her fingers still resting on the braille menu. "Depends on what you're looking for. Comfort or adventure?" "I think I've had enough adventure for one morning," Catherine said with a rueful smile. "Then our house blend with a splash of vanilla cream. It tastes like a warm hug feels. Perfect." As James prepared her coffee, Catherine found herself studying the sounds of the shop. The gentle hiss of the espresso machine, the soft jazz playing overhead, the rustle of newspaper pages from the corner table. It felt lived in, loved, nothing like the sterile corporate environments she usually inhabited. "Here you go," James said, placing the cup carefully in her hands. "Fair warning, it's hot." Catherine wrapped her fingers around the ceramic mug, feeling its warmth seep into her palms. She took a tentative sip and closed her eyes. "This is incredible." "Lily picked the beans," James said proudly. "She has a better palate than most coffee snobs." "I heard that," Lily called out, but her voice carried laughter. Catherine found herself lingering, reluctant to return to the cold world outside. "Do you mind if I sit for a while?" The storm. Of course. Let me show you to a table. James guided her to a corner spot near the window, where she could hear the rain without feeling the draft. Her service dog, a golden retriever named Atlas, settled beside her chair with a contented sigh. Beautiful dog, James observed. Atlas has been with me for 3 years, Catherine said, scratching behind the dog's ears. He's seen me through some difficult times. There was something in her voice, a weight that James recognized, the sound of someone carrying invisible scars. Lily's been asking for a dog, James said, settling into the chair across from her. But between the shop and everything else, it's expensive, Catherine finished gently. The training, the care, the time. I understand. They sat in comfortable silence for a moment, listening to the storm rage outside. Catherine found herself relaxing in a way she hadn't in months. When was the last time someone had simply sat with her without wanting something? Without treating her blindness as either a tragedy to pity or an obstacle to overcome? Can I ask you something? James said suddenly. Of course. How do you do it? Handle people like Kevin, you were so calm. Catherine's smile turned sad. Practice. Lots of practice. She took another sip of coffee. You learn to build walls, to expect the worst from people. It hurts less that way. That's no way to live. No, Catherine agreed quietly. It isn't. Lily appeared at their table, moving with the confidence of someone who knew every inch of the space. Dad, Mrs. Chun wants to pay for the ladies' coffee. Catherine looked up, startled. That's very kind, but not necessary. She says Kevin was rude and she wants to apologize for Portland. Lily continued with the matter-of-fact delivery of a child. Also, she thinks you have a pretty voice. Tell Mrs. Chun thank you, but the coffee's on the house today, James said firmly. Already paid for, Lily grinned. She left money on the counter and said to keep the change for my college fund. Catherine felt tears prick her eyes. Kindness from strangers, a father who defended customers from his own employee, a child who spoke to her like she was just another person instead of a problem to solve. When had she last experienced this kind of simple human decency? Your daughter is remarkable, Catherine told James. She gets that from her mother, James said, and something shifted in his voice. Pain, carefully controlled but unmistakable. Catherine heard it, recognized it. The sound of loss, of grief held close to the chest. She wanted to ask, but some wounds were too private for strangers to probe. Instead, she said, and her father, I think. James looked at her, really looked, and saw something he hadn't expected. Not pity for his circumstances or judgment about his struggling business, but understanding. Recognition of one wounded soul by another. What do you do? He asked. For work, Catherine hesitated. The truth would change everything, would bring back the walls and the careful distance. But sitting here, feeling human for the first time in months, she couldn't bear to lie completely. I work in technology, she said carefully. Corporate consulting. It wasn't entirely false. As CEO of Neural Drive Systems, she did consult on corporate strategy. She just left out the part about being responsible for the autonomous vehicle division that had killed his wife. Must be interesting work, James said politely. It pays the bills, Catherine replied, hating herself for the deception but unable to stop. What about you? Have you always wanted to own a coffee shop? James's laugh was bitter. Not exactly. I used to be an architect. This place, it's more of a necessity than a dream. There was a story there Catherine could tell. Loss and compromise and dreams deferred. She wanted to know more, wanted to understand what had brought this kind man to this small coffee shop where he defended strangers from cruel employees. But before she could ask, the door chimed again, and Kevin's voice carried from the back room. Great. More weirdos probably. James's face darkened, and Catherine felt the moment of connection slip away like water through her fingers. The real world was intruding again, with its cruelties and complications. I should go, she said, standing carefully. You don't have to, James said quickly. Kevin's just an ass, Lily finished cheerfully, making Catherine laugh despite everything. Lily, James warned, but his heart wasn't in it. It's okay, Catherine said, gathering her purse and Atlas's leash. But thank you for everything. This was exactly what I needed. She meant it. For 45 minutes, she'd felt like a person instead of a problem. She'd been seen, heard, treated with dignity and kindness. It was more than she'd experienced in her corporate world in years. Will you come back? Lily asked hopefully. Catherine paused at the door, Atlas patient beside her. The smart thing would be to say no, to return to her sterile penthouse and her guilt-ridden isolation. But looking back at James and Lily, at this small oasis of kindness in a cruel world, she found herself nodding. I'd like that very much. As she stepped back into the storm, Catherine Sterling carried something she hadn't felt in 3 years. Hope. Behind her, James watched through the rain-streaked window, unaware that he'd just welcomed the architect of his family's destruction into his heart. The irony would have destroyed them both, if they'd known. But for now, there was only kindness and the promise of tomorrow. She can't possibly afford that equipment, Dad. We can barely pay rent. Lily's whispered words hit James like a punch to the chest as he watched Catherine examine the expensive assistive technology brochure she'd left behind 3 days ago. The glossy pages showcased devices that cost more than his monthly income, yet Catherine had been casually discussing them as if money meant nothing. James picked up the brochure with trembling hands. Advanced screen readers, smart navigation systems, voice-activated home controls. Each item carried a price tag that made his stomach clench. Who was this woman who could afford such luxuries while he counted every coffee bean? Maybe she's just window shopping, he murmured, but doubt gnawed at him. Catherine had become a daily fixture at Haven Grounds over the past week, arriving each morning at exactly 9:30 with Atlas at her side. She always ordered the same house blend with vanilla cream, always sat at the corner table, always left a $20 tip that James pretended not to notice but desperately needed. But something didn't add up. Her clothes were expensive, her phone was the latest model, and yesterday he'd overheard her scheduling what sounded like a corporate board meeting. Technology consulting, she'd said. But what kind of consultant could afford to tip more than most people spent on coffee? Good morning, James. Catherine's voice interrupted his thoughts as she entered with her usual grace, Atlas guiding her expertly around the morning rush crowd. Morning, Catherine. The usual? Please. She settled at her table, but today something was different. Her hands shook slightly as she folded her white cane, and her smile seemed forced. James prepared her coffee, stealing glances at her reflection in the espresso machine's chrome surface. She looked tired, stressed, like someone carrying a weight too heavy for her shoulders. Rough night? He asked gently, setting her cup down. You could say that. Catherine wrapped her fingers around the warm ceramic, seeking comfort. Work complications. Before James could respond, Kevin's voice cut through the morning calm like a rusty blade. Oh great. The charity case is back. The words were spoken just loud enough for Catherine to hear, just quiet enough for Kevin to claim innocence if confronted. James felt his jaw clench, but Catherine's reaction stopped him cold. Instead of hurt or anger, her face went completely blank, as if she'd simply switched off her emotions. Kevin, James warned, but the damage was done. What? I'm just saying, maybe she should find a coffee shop that specializes in her situation. We're trying to run a business here. Catherine stood abruptly, her chair scraping against the floor. Perhaps he's right. I should go. No. The word came out sharper than James intended. Kevin, you're done for the day. Go home. You can't fire me for telling the truth. Watch me. Kevin's face flushed red, but he grabbed his jacket and stormed out, muttering under his breath about political correctness and special treatment. The coffee shop fell silent except for the gentle jazz playing overhead. Catherine remained standing, her knuckles white as she gripped her cane. I don't want to cause problems for your business. The only problem is Kevin's attitude, James said firmly. Please sit. Your coffee's getting cold. She hesitated, then slowly lowered herself back into the chair. You can't keep defending me. It's not sustainable. Let me worry about that. But even as he said it, James felt the familiar weight of financial pressure. Kevin was cheap labor, and firing him meant finding someone else, training them, hoping they'd work for what he could afford to pay. The math was brutal, but some things mattered more than money. "Tell me about your work," James said, settling into the chair across from her. "Technology consulting sounds interesting." Catherine's fingers tightened around her coffee cup. "It's complicated. Most worthwhile things are." She was quiet for a long moment, and James could practically see her internal struggle. Finally, she spoke, her voice carefully measured. "I work for a large corporation. We develop systems that are supposed to make life easier, safer. But sometimes—" She trailed off, shaking her head. "Sometimes the people making decisions don't understand the real-world consequences of their choices." "Sounds frustrating." "It is." Catherine's voice carried a weight that suggested personal experience. "Especially when those decisions hurt innocent people." James felt a chill run down his spine. Something in her tone, the way she said "innocent people," triggered a memory he tried to bury. Corporate lawyers with their careful language, their talk of algorithmic miscalculations and acceptable risk parameters. "What kind of systems?" he asked, though part of him didn't want to know the answer. Catherine went very still. "Autonomous vehicles, primarily. Self-driving cars, delivery systems, public transportation." The coffee cup slipped from James's suddenly nerveless fingers, shattering against the floor in an explosion of ceramic and hot liquid. The sound echoed through the shop like a gunshot. "Dad!" Lily's voice carried concern as she hurried over with a towel. "I'm fine, sweetheart. Just clumsy." But he wasn't fine. Autonomous vehicles, self-driving systems, the same technology that had killed Elena, that had reduced his wife to a settlement check and a corporate apology. Catherine had gone pale, her hands trembling as she reached for her purse. "I should leave." "No, wait." James forced himself to speak calmly, though his heart was racing. "I'm sorry, I have some history with that industry." "What kind of history?" The question hung in the air between them like a loaded weapon. James looked at this woman who'd become so important to him and Lily in just 1 week. This woman who brought light to their dark little world, and felt the weight of secrets pressing down on him. "My wife was killed by a self-driving vehicle 3 years ago," he said quietly. Catherine's face went white as paper. Her breathing became shallow, rapid, and for a moment James thought she might faint. "I'm so sorry," she whispered, and there was something in her voice, a depth of anguish that went beyond polite sympathy. "It was ruled an accident. Sensor malfunction. The company settled out of court." James's voice was flat, emotionless, the way it always got when he talked about Elena's death. "Which company?" The question was barely audible, but James heard the desperate hope in it, as if she was praying for a specific answer. "Neural drive systems." Catherine made a sound like she'd been physically struck. Her hands flew to her mouth, and tears began streaming down her face. "Catherine? What's wrong?" She was shaking now, her whole body trembling as if she was coming apart at the seams. Atlas whined and pressed against her legs, sensing her distress. "I have to go," she gasped, standing so quickly her chair toppled backward. "I'm sorry. I'm so sorry." "Catherine, wait." But she was already moving, Atlas guiding her toward the door with practiced efficiency. She moved like someone fleeing a crime scene, desperate to escape before the truth caught up with her. James watched her go, confusion and concern warring in his chest. What had he said that triggered such a reaction? Why had mentioning neural drive affected her so deeply? "Dad, what just happened?" Lily asked, her young face creased with worry. "I don't know, sweetheart. I honestly don't know." But as he cleaned up the broken coffee cup, James couldn't shake the feeling that Catherine's reaction had been more than simple sympathy. There had been guilt in her tears, recognition in her shock. Almost as if she knew something about Elena's death that she hadn't shared. The thought was ridiculous, of course. Catherine was a technology consultant, not a corporate executive. She couldn't possibly have any connection to the company that had destroyed his family. Could she? Outside, Catherine sat in her car with Atlas beside her. her phone pressed to her ear with shaking hands. "Richard, it's Catherine. We need to talk about the Mitchell case. The one from 3 years ago." Her voice was barely controlled, each word a struggle. "I think I've made a terrible mistake." On the other end of the line, Richard Dalton's voice was sharp with concern. "Catherine, what are you talking about? That case was closed years ago." "I know the victim's family," she whispered, the words tasting like poison in her mouth. I've been spending time with them. They don't know who I am." The silence on the other end was deafening. "Catherine," Richard said finally, his voice deadly calm, "tell me you haven't done anything stupid." But it was too late for that. She'd already done the stupidest thing imaginable. She'd fallen in love with the family she'd destroyed, and now the truth was going to tear them all apart. The question was whether she had the courage to tell James herself, or if she'd let him discover it the hard way. Either choice would destroy the only happiness she'd found in 3 years of guilt and isolation. But some secrets were too big to keep forever. "Dad, your phone is reading something weird." Lily's innocent words shattered the morning calm at Haven Grounds like glass hitting concrete. James looked up from the espresso machine to see his daughter holding Catherine's phone, which had somehow activated its voice assistant during Catherine's hurried exit the day before. "Catherine Sterling, Chief Executive Officer, Neural Drive Systems," the mechanical voice announced with devastating clarity. "Meeting reminder, board review of autonomous vehicle safety protocols, 10 a.m. The phone slipped from Lily's hands, clattering to the floor as James felt the world tilt sideways. "Chief Executive Officer, Neural Drive Systems." The words echoed in his skull like hammer blows, each repetition driving the truth deeper into his consciousness. Catherine wasn't a technology consultant. She was the CEO of the company that had killed Elena. "Dad." Lily's voice seemed to come from very far away. "What's Neural Drive Systems?" James couldn't answer, couldn't breathe. The woman who'd brought light back into their lives, who'd made Lily laugh for the first time in months, who'd become the closest thing to family they'd had since Elena died, was the architect of their destruction. The coffee shop door chimed, and Catherine entered with Atlas at her side, moving with the same graceful confidence she'd shown every morning for 2 weeks. But today, James saw her differently. The expensive clothes weren't just good taste, they were executive armor. The way she carried herself wasn't quiet dignity. It was corporate power barely contained. "Good morning," she said, her voice carrying the same warmth that had melted his defenses. "I'm sorry about yesterday. I wasn't feeling well." James stared at her. This woman who'd sat at his table, who'd listened to him talk about Elena's death, who'd comforted him through his grief while knowing she was responsible for every tear he'd shed. "You're Catherine Sterling," he said, his voice flat and emotionless. Catherine went very still. Atlas whined softly, sensing the sudden tension in the room. "James, I can explain. You're the CEO of Neural Drive Systems." The words hung in the air like an accusation, and Catherine's carefully constructed world began to crumble. Her hands found Atlas's harness, seeking stability in a moment when everything was falling apart. "Yes," she whispered. "You killed my wife." "James, please let me explain." "Explain what?" His voice was rising now, 3 years of suppressed rage finally finding its target. "Explain how you sat in my coffee shop, drank my coffee, played with my daughter, all while knowing you were responsible for Elena's death." Lily had gone very quiet behind the counter, her young mind struggling to process the adult emotions swirling around her. She'd never heard her father's voice carry such pain, such betrayal. "It wasn't supposed to happen," Catherine said, tears streaming down her face. "The system wasn't ready, but the board was pressuring us to launch. I should have said no, should have waited. But the competition was ahead of us and the investors were threatening to pull funding." "So you decided my wife's life was an acceptable risk?" "No, I never thought anyone would get hurt. The testing showed the system was safe in controlled environments. We didn't account for real-world variables, for the way shadows fall at certain times of day, for how the sensors would react to Elena's white coat in that specific lighting." James felt sick. She was talking about Elena like she was a data point, a variable in an equation that hadn't balanced properly. You covered it up, he said, remembering the corporate lawyers, the quick settlement, the way the story had disappeared from the news within days. Richard Dalton handled the legal response. I wanted to take responsibility to meet with your family personally, but the lawyers said it would create liability issues. They said a settlement was the cleanest solution for everyone. Cleanest for who? For you? For your stock price. Catherine flinched as if he'd struck her. I know how it sounds, but I've lived with the guilt every day since. I funded safety research, implemented new protocols, tried to make sure nothing like this ever happens again. And you thought that was enough? You thought throwing money at the problem would bring Elena back? No, I thought. Catherine's voice broke. I thought if I could just do enough good, if I could prevent other families from going through what you went through, maybe I could find some kind of peace. So you decided to spy on us? To infiltrate our lives? It wasn't like that. I came here because I needed to see, to understand what my decisions had cost. But then I met you and Lily, and you were so kind, so genuine. For the first time in 3 years, I felt human again. James laughed bitterly. Human? You want to talk about being human? Elena was human. She had dreams, plans, a daughter who needed her. She was walking to pick up Lily's birthday present when your machine killed her. The words hit Catherine like physical blows. She'd read the accident report, knew the clinical details, but hearing the human story behind the data was devastating. I'm sorry, she whispered. I'm so sorry. Sorry doesn't bring her back. Sorry doesn't pay for Lily's medical expenses, or keep this place running, or fill the hole in our lives where Elena used to be. Lily stepped forward then, her small voice cutting through the adult anger like a knife. Dad, stop. Lily, go to the back room. No. There was steel in her young voice, the same strength that had carried her through 10 years of blindness. Catherine, is it true? Did your company hurt my mom? Catherine knelt down, bringing herself to Lily's eye level even though the child couldn't see her. Yes, sweetheart. It's true. I made a terrible decision, and your mother died because of it. Did you mean for it to happen? No, never. I would give anything to undo that day. Lily was quiet for a long moment, processing information that no 10-year-old should have to handle. Finally, she spoke. My mom always said that people make mistakes, but what matters is what they do after. What did you do after? Catherine's voice was barely audible. I tried to make things better. I changed how we test our systems, how we roll out new technology. I funded research into pedestrian safety, accessibility improvements. But nothing I do will ever be enough. Why didn't you tell us who you were? Because I was a coward. Because I knew that if you knew the truth, you'd hate me. And I couldn't bear to lose the only real friendship I'd had in years. James watched this exchange with a mixture of rage and heartbreak. Even now, even knowing what Catherine had done, Lily was trying to understand, trying to find compassion in a situation that defied it. You used us, he said quietly. You used our grief, our loneliness, our need for connection. You made us care about you while knowing you were the reason we were broken in the first place. I never meant for it to go this far. I thought I'd visit once, maybe twice, just to see what kind of people you were. But you were so kind to me, so accepting. You treated me like I mattered, like I was worth something beyond my corporate title. So you decided to play house with the family you destroyed? Catherine stood slowly, her face streaked with tears. I know you'll never forgive me. I know I don't deserve forgiveness. But I want you to know that these past 2 weeks, getting to know you and Lily, have been the most meaningful of my life. Get out. James, please. Get out of my shop. Get out of our lives. And if you have any decency left, you'll make sure we never see you again. Catherine nodded, her shoulders shaking with silent sobs. She turned toward the door, Atlas guiding her carefully around the tables and chairs. Catherine, wait. Lily's voice stopped her at the threshold. Yes, sweetheart. I don't hate you. I'm sad and confused, but I don't hate you. My mom wouldn't want me to hate you. Catherine's composure finally shattered completely. She pressed her hand to her mouth, trying to contain the grief that threatened to overwhelm her. Thank you, she managed. That means more than you know. And then she was gone, leaving behind only the lingering scent of her perfume and the wreckage of 2 weeks of carefully built trust. James sank into a chair, his legs suddenly unable to support him. The woman he'd begun to care for, the woman who'd brought joy back into Lily's life, was the same person who'd signed Elena's death warrant with corporate ambition and calculated risk. Dad. Lily's voice was small, uncertain. I'm here, sweetheart. Are you okay? James looked at his daughter, this remarkable child who'd just shown more grace and wisdom than most adults possessed, and felt his heart break all over again. I don't know, he said honestly. I really don't know. 3 weeks passed like a slow-motion nightmare. James threw himself into the coffee shop with desperate intensity, working 18-hour days to avoid thinking about Catherine's betrayal. But everywhere he looked, he saw reminders of her presence. The corner table where she'd sat every morning. The Braille menu she'd praised. The $20 tips that had helped keep them afloat. Lily's assistive technology had been failing for days, the screen reader glitching and the navigation system giving incorrect directions. James had called the manufacturer twice, but the repair estimate was more than he made in a month. Without the equipment, Lily struggled to do her homework, to navigate unfamiliar spaces, to maintain the independence she'd fought so hard to achieve. Dad, I can't read this assignment, Lily said, frustration evident in her voice as she sat at the kitchen table above the coffee shop. The reader keeps skipping lines. James looked at the device, this lifeline that connected his daughter to the world, and felt helpless. He'd already sold Elena's jewelry, had borrowed against the shop's equipment, had exhausted every option he could think of. We'll figure something out, sweetheart. But they both knew the truth. Without money for repairs or replacement, Lily would be cut off from the digital world that had become essential for her education and independence. The next morning brought unexpected visitors. 2 men in expensive suits entered Haven grounds, their federal badges glinting in the morning light. James Mitchell? I'm Agent Rodriguez, FBI. We'd like to ask you some questions about neural drive systems. James's blood ran cold. What kind of questions? We're investigating allegations of corporate misconduct, specifically related to the cover-up of safety issues in their autonomous vehicle division. We understand your wife was killed by one of their vehicles. 3 years ago, yes. We have reason to believe that critical safety data was suppressed during the investigation of that incident. Someone has provided us with internal documents that suggest the company knew about sensor failures but chose to launch anyway. James felt the world shift around him. What kind of documents? Agent Rodriguez opened his briefcase and pulled out a thick folder. Engineering reports, safety assessments, internal emails discussing the risks. All provided by someone with high-level access to company files. Who? We can't reveal our source, but I can tell you they've been cooperating fully with our investigation. Thanks to their information, we've arrested Richard Dalton, the executive who orchestrated the cover-up. James stared at the documents, seeing Elena's death transformed from a tragic accident into a preventable crime. Someone at Neural Drive had known the risks and chosen profits over safety. There's something else, Agent Rodriguez continued. Your source has also provided funding for a comprehensive review of all autonomous vehicle incidents from the past 5 years. They're calling it the Elena Mitchell Institute for Ethical AI and Disability Inclusion. The name hit James like a physical blow. Elena's name, attached to something that might prevent other families from suffering as they had. Who's funding this? I think you know. That afternoon, James found himself standing outside Neural Drive's headquarters, a gleaming tower of glass and steel that had haunted his nightmares for 3 years. The lobby was chaos, reporters and cameras everywhere as news of the arrests and investigations spread. He found Catherine in her office on the 40th floor, staring out at the city with Atlas at her feet. She looked smaller somehow, diminished by the weight of public scrutiny and corporate scandal. I heard about Dalton's arrest, James said from the doorway. Catherine turned, her face showing surprise and something that might have been hope. James, I didn't expect to see you. The FBI said someone provided them with internal documents. Someone with high-level access. Richard buried everything. The safety reports, the engineering concerns, the recommendations to delay the launch. He convinced the board that a quick settlement was better than admitting fault. So you decided to expose him? Catherine's laugh was bitter. I decided to do what I should have done 3 years ago. Take responsibility. James stepped into the office, noting the packed boxes, the cleared desk. You're leaving. The board asked for my resignation this morning. Apparently, cooperating with federal investigators is bad for shareholder confidence. And the Elena Mitchell Institute? My personal project. I've liquidated most of my assets to fund it. It won't bring Elena back, but maybe it can prevent other tragedies. James was quiet for a long moment, processing this information. The woman who'd betrayed his trust had also sacrificed her career, her fortune, her future to seek justice for Elena's death. Lily's equipment is broken, he said finally. Catherine's face crumpled. I know. I had the latest assistive technology delivered to your shop this morning. Anonymous donation. Catherine, I know you don't want my help. I know you hate me. But Lily shouldn't suffer because of my mistakes. James looked at this woman who'd destroyed his family and then tried to rebuild it, who'd lied to him and then sacrificed everything for the truth. The anger was still there, the sense of betrayal, but underneath it was something else. Recognition of someone trying to make amends, trying to transform guilt into action. Lily wants to see you, he said quietly. What? She's been asking about you every day. She doesn't understand why you can't visit anymore. Catherine's eyes filled with tears. I can't. It wouldn't be right. Maybe that's not your decision to make. They drove to Haven grounds in silence, Atlas between them in the back seat. The coffee shop was closed for the afternoon, but James led Catherine inside, where Lily was waiting at her usual table. Catherine. Lily's voice was hopeful, uncertain. I'm here, sweetheart. Lily stood and walked carefully to where Catherine sat, then wrapped her arms around the woman who'd become so important to her. Catherine held her tightly, tears streaming down her face. I missed you, Lily said simply. I missed you too. Dad told me what you did, about the bad man who hid the truth. Catherine looked over Lily's head at James, who was watching the reunion with conflicted emotions. I should have done it sooner, Catherine said. I should have been braver. My mom always said it's never too late to do the right thing. They sat together for an hour, talking carefully around the pain and betrayal. What will you do now? James asked as Catherine prepared to leave. I don't know. Start over, I suppose. Try to build something better. The Institute needs a director, he said quietly. Someone who understands both the technology and the human cost. Catherine looked at him in surprise. James, I can't ask you to. You're not asking. I'm offering. Elena would want her name attached to something that makes a difference. 6 months later, Haven grounds had been transformed. The coffee shop still operated on the ground floor, but the upper levels housed the Elena Mitchell Institute, where researchers worked on making technology safer and more accessible for everyone. Catherine had taken a small apartment nearby, close enough to help with the institute but far enough to respect the boundaries that still existed between them. She and James weren't friends, exactly, but they were partners in something larger than their personal pain. Lily thrived with her new equipment, but more importantly, she'd become the institute's unofficial ambassador, testing new technologies and providing feedback from a user's perspective. You know what I think? Lily said one afternoon as she, James, and Catherine reviewed proposals for new accessibility research. What's that, sweetheart? James asked. I think Mom would be proud of what we're building here. Not just the institute, but us. The way we're trying to help people. Catherine smiled. The first genuine smile James had seen from her in months. I think you're right. It wasn't a fairy tale ending. The pain was still there, the loss still real. But they'd found a way to transform tragedy into purpose, guilt into action, betrayal into something approaching redemption. The coffee shop had become more than a business. It was a symbol of second chances, of the power of seeing people for who they truly are rather than dismissing them for what they lack. And every morning, when Catherine entered with Atlas at her side, James would lean close and whisper the words that had started it all. "You're not invisible, not today, because in the end, that's all any of us really need. To be seen, to be valued, to know that our presence in the world matters." The coffee shop buzzed with quiet activity as researchers, advocates, and families touched by technology's failures and successes gathered to share their stories. James looked around the institute at the researchers working to prevent future tragedies, and realized that sometimes the most broken people are the ones who build the most beautiful things from the pieces. Sometimes the greatest act of love is simply refusing to let someone disappear. What would you have done in James's situation? When he discovered that the woman who had brought light back into his and Lily's lives was the same person responsible for his wife's death, James faced an impossible choice. Would you have been able to find it in your heart to work alongside Catherine, knowing what she had done? Or would the betrayal have been too deep to overcome? Have you ever been in a situation where someone you trusted turned out to be connected to your pain in ways you never imagined? How did you handle it? And what about Catherine's journey from corporate executive to someone willing to sacrifice everything for redemption? Do you believe people can truly change? Or are some mistakes too big to forgive? Share your thoughts in the comments below. Your story might help someone else who's struggling with forgiveness, betrayal, or finding purpose after tragedy. If this story touched your heart, please like and subscribe for more inspiring tales of human resilience and the power of second chances. Remember, you never know the battles people are fighting, and sometimes the smallest act of kindness can rewrite someone's entire life.